we've implemented the functionality of our quote machine, and now we are going to style it. And this is going to be, this could be an interesting walkthrough, because the process is not necessarily as scientific as some of the other stuff we've been doing. It's a lot of kind of, I don't know, putting and organizing these kind of elusive pieces together, and CSS is not my strongest suit personally, but I can definitely walk us through the basics and kind of go over how Bootstrap works. So this is, we don't even need this JavaScript here. We already have it, it's all working. Now we just want to style it, make it look like it's not from 1999. So first thing we're going to do, of course, is we need to get in Bootstrap, because that's what we will be using. In CodePen, you can just go into settings, go into the CSS, there's a quick add, and we can just add Bootstrap down there. Once we save it, we should see, if we run, if we're not auto-running, we should see our font change to the sans serif font face. So we have Bootstrap running, and let's start by adding in some Bootstrap classes. I'm going to start with the button, and the first class you add always is button, btn, bitten, and you want to add a second class that specifies what kind of bitten we have. This is like the parent bitten, and this is the detailed bitten. We're just going to do bitten default, and let's get that going. Should look something like that. Now all the stuff is to the side. I want to start centering everything. So we're going to use the grid system in Bootstrap, and the way the grid system works is you specify how many columns across you want a specific element to take up, depending on the size of the screen. This is basic stuff that is taught in FreeCodeCamp before this project, so it shouldn't be too much of a mystery. So the first thing I want to do is I actually want to make these elements that are being selected by jQuery, I'm going to wrap them in another div. I'm going to change it a little bit. So the first thing I want to do is, how do I want to do this? Let's add a div here, just put this in here, and I'm going to change this a little bit. I don't need another block element in here, so I'm going to make this a span. The difference is a span is an inline element, and it can be treated sort of as text, whereas a div is a block element and can be positioned a little more nicely. Let me just close this before I forget. And in this as well, let's add a few other things. Let's add an h2 tag and a quote on the outside there. Another quote here, and an h2 tag. So if we run that, we get something like that. So we have some quotes now. It's a little more, it's going to take up the page a little more nicely. I'm going to go ahead right now and change this. I want to auto update. Now that we're not dealing with code, it's not as sensitive. So now we've auto updated, that's nice. And I also want to make this italics. We can do that in CSS. For this one, I'm just going to use EM, not always recommended, but we can be rebels here and then. There we go. And let's do the same thing for down here. Change this to span, and add a closing div, and let's just make this an h4 and close here with an h4. And I'm going to add 2 dashes so we have the usual hyphened author there. Great, so now we want to start adding in some Bootstrap classes. I don't like how this, of course, is all the way across the screen. It looks kind of ugly, so I want to kind of bring it in on both sides. So the way I'm going to do that is we're going to start with our Bootstrap grid system. Because everything is in a row, we're going to want to make an outer div array. An outer div array, what am I saying? An outer div with a class of row. Just like that. And at the bottom here, going to put that in there. Indent, 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 all the things. Great. So now that we have that, I want to add some padding on this side. So I can add another div, and I'll give this a class of column medium 2. So now when I'm on a medium screen, this column, and let me close the tag there, and close the div. So if I'm on the screen, so we should complete this this right here, add another class of column medium 8. So all you need to know right now is that it's already looking nicer. This is just a column of nothing that's essentially here, spanning 2 units, and this right here is a column of 8 that is essentially here. And remember, the Bootstrap grid is a total of 12, that's how it's divided. So we have 2 here, 8 here, and then the remaining 2 is just kind of filled in at the end there. Let me just close this tag over here, indent some more. And this needs to be indented one more. Great, so we're still nice and organized. So that's looking pretty good. I think it's going to be time to start adding some styling. So for styling, we want to, well, let's look at what we want to style first. I kind of want to style this button because it's looking a little bland to me. That's going to be my first point of action to start getting in some color. So we have this class here, button default, and this is a class that Bootstrap has, and Bootstrap has its own CSS that is using this to style it. But what's nice about cascading style sheets is we can include and or override the styling rules that are happening when our stuff follows what is in previously. So I can select this class button default the same way Bootstrap uses it, and I can add or override some things, and I want to override the background color. Now I want to just point out one thing real quick. This is color. Notice what happens. This is background color. Notice what happens. Color is for the actual text. Background color is for the actual background. And more specifically, I'm going to just do background. Background can be a color, it can be a URL image. This is a more general rule which will override different properties that we probably want overridden. Background color is kind of a subset of background, and we generally don't want to use that unless we're using it for a specific purpose. For your purposes right now, I would just always use background for a background color. So I got a few hex colors picked out here, and so for the background color we're going to use 3, 4, 4, 9, 5, E to get, no, that's not the one I want. What's the one that I want? I think I want this one here. Yep, got that nice fun red color to it. And it's hard to see the text, so we can also style the color. We can style it ECF0F1, for instance. It's nicely inverted. And I'm going to make it bold. And we set font weight to bold. To do that, whenever we want to set text to bold, it's font weight bold. Now this is looking a little nicer. You see something strange is kind of happening. The quote button changes depending on its state. There's a few pseudo-classes associated with button. One is hover and one is focus. So when I'm hovering over it, I do want to change it, but I don't want it to be white. So we can then again select button default and then get a little more specific with a colon and hover. That's our pseudo class for when the mouse has hovered over this button, apply these styles as well. So we're going to apply a background that I kind of hinted at before, 34495E, and we're going to set a color to F1C40F. And once it reloads, make sure it gives it some time. There we go. So it changes to a fun little kind of charcoaly. Now notice that even though I didn't say font weight here bold, notice that the font is still bold even though I didn't specify it. And that's how style sheets work. That's the cascading aspect. These are all still being applied. So background is applied first, then color, then font weight, because this is still, it has a hover class on it when I'm hovering over it, but it's still also button default. So that's applying. We apply this background, this color, and font weight bold. Then hover additionally applies. It rewrites, it overwrites background with a new background, it overwrites color with a new color, but there's no specification in font weight there, so the one before it is still persisting. I could change, font weight, I think it's normal. And if I do that, now the bold actually gets taken off, but I don't want to do that. I want to keep that persisted there. That looks, that looks pretty nice to me. Okay, great. So what else do I want to do here? Well, I certainly want to add a background, a whole background to the entire... actually, before I do that, there's one thing that's a little annoying, and that is the quote button kind of moves as the new quotes are generated depending on the size. So I want to kind of specify a width for all of this stuff so that it doesn't move anymore, and so the quote button just stays where it is. Because right now, when the quote button is like being clicked, we keep the hover state and it looks kind of weird. Also, it's still white now because it's on a focus. So let's also make button default focus that as well. So now, are you working correctly? Oh, I need to make sure there's a period to specify it's a class. And now, once it loses focus, it stays red as well. So let's address this here. We are going to want to, basically, I want to get all of this stuff here, and I want this to be a certain height, not the button. The button's going to be its own individual thing. So we're going to need to put this once again in another div container. And I'm going to give it an ID, and I'm going to call it text container. All the way to here. Great. So, and what did that do? Well, when we're styling things, it's nice to do something like this. I'm going to select this ID, text container. I'm just going to give it a background color. Oh, see, I did the same thing. Background color of red. So now we can see exactly what this div I made is actually encompassing. So as we can see, it changes height every once in a while. Let's address that now. We will change it to height, and let's say the height is 170 pixels. So that looks pretty nice. Let's view it a little more. I'm going to open up my dev tool so I can just see what happens. Now look at this. When this happens, there is a problem. If we get a quote that's too big, it no longer adjusts this div element here, but the text overflows, and that almost looks worse than having the button move around. So in that case, I want to take the lesser of two evils and actually I do want to let it grow. So instead of using a height, I'm going to specify min height. That means if the height would be less than 170, if it's a smaller quote, make it 170 pixels. Otherwise, if the quote happens to be larger than that, just keep growing. And if I scroll now, whoops, I get this, scroll in, as you can see, the div element now will grow and will contain the text. The button moves, but it's better than the other than the worst outcome of having text like flow behind it. So that is looking dandy. We can now take out this background color, and our quote button now stays exactly where it is when we click. So we are moving right along. I think now would be a great time to start adding a background and making this look even nicer. So we are going to make a background that stretches the length of the screen, and we're just going to select the whole body tag now. And there's a trick to getting this to happen. It's found on CSS Tricks, which I will link to, and it's a great blog for CSS. It knows there's a lot more information than I personally know. But here's a great little trick right here. We have background, and the background, instead of setting it to a color like I've done before, is we are setting it to an image, and this image of this very nice Game of Thrones image here. So we're setting that to linking it to an image. These extra properties, no repeat, center, center fixed. I don't exactly know what all these do in depth. This is from CSS Tricks, and it works very nicely. As you can see, the image kind of, let's change our view to full page. So the image, it really scales nicely with however you're viewing it. So there we got our background, and we need to read this text now because it's not very readable. But I still want this background to show because it's a very nice background, so we're just going to put a translucent pane behind all this content. That way we can keep our text readable but also kind of show what the background behind it is. So let's go back in here. And of course we will need to, you probably guessed it, make another div tag around all this great stuff. This is going to be this will be an ID, I'll make it, and we'll make it container over on here and close it off. Great. So if I'll keep body on below there. So this is our huge main first container. And let's add color. Not color though, right? Background. So we can see where this spans. Okay. So we want to change that a little bit. This is the first block element. So it's a block that contains everything else in it. We have a good amount of powerful options we can use with a block element that's unaffected by other things. We will start with, if I select my container again, let's kind of play with the positions of this. First thing we're going to want to do is we want to make let's make a nicer background. We can use, background. We can use RGBA. This stands for red, green, blue, and alpha. And it takes arguments, kind of like a function does, and it takes the amount of hue of each of these colors. So I'm just going to do 50, 50, 50, 0.6. Basically a grayer image and 60% transparent, or 40% transparent, 60% non-transparent, I believe. Let's also change our text color. So we can just take our color and we can make it, let's just make it white. Okay, that's fine for now. So we got a translucent background. It's a little more easy to read everything. Great. Now let's get our let's get our width. So if I specify width here, for example, now we have a little more, a little more, it doesn't go across the entire screen, which I kind of like. And we're going to make that the max width, so that if it gets smaller, this will take up the whole screen, but if we have a large screen, it won't take up, it won't take up all of it. We got some space there. Of course, we want this whole thing centered, so to center our block element, we're going to do margin, and it's really margin left adds as much margining as we can until we get all the way to the left. Margin right does the same on the right side, so it smushes on both sides until each side has an equal amount of padding here and can bring this to the center. But I'm going to use the shorthand version of this, and that is, if there's two properties in the margin, this first one stands for top bottom and the second stands for left right. So we want the left and right both to be auto, so doing 0 auto will allow this to happen. I also don't want this to be at the very top of the web page, so let's add some margin up there. We're just going to make that, let's say 30 pixels. Now it's a little further down. That's looking a little nicer. I don't like how this quote here is all the way like at the very edge of this div, this button here. So let's also add some padding, and that will have some separation between the end of the content of the block and the block itself. Let's add padding 15 pixels. When there's no other rule there, when there's only one value, it's the padding all around it. That looks nice. And I'm going to change this button here. I'm going to make this button a little more fancier. We're going to come back here and we are going to add a width, and I'm going to make it 100%. 100% is the width of its parent element. So if we look here, we have this button, and its parent element is one indentation out. That is column medium 8. So that's where the button is. I'm thinking I want to play around a little bit and take this out here, and what if we... No, I'm not going to do that. Bad idea. Okay, I'm going to keep that where it is. Got the new quote. That's all nice and well. I just want to add one more thing, and I want to add, of course, a title. So this is pretty much like what we've done before. Let's add a div, give it a class of a row. This will be above our first row. And we'll give the same type of setup. Column medium 2, column small 1, add another div, equals column medium 8. Actually, take that out, just do mediums. And so now we have, if we type in here, we get another spot up there. Great, so I'm going to make a div element inside it, give it h1. Here's our title, Game of Thrones. And I'll make another div element, h4, a song of divs and Bootstrap. Div for a nice little play on the Game of Thrones novels. Alright, So if we look at this now, if we change our view to check out the full page, that is looking quite nice. Everything stays right where it is. And it's looking good. I hope this walkthrough has not been this walkthrough has not been too boring. It definitely is a harder one to kind of explain. I feel like I just kind of made some random choices and said those random choices out loud, but I hope it makes sense. I feel like HTML styling and Bootstrap is one of those things where you just have to kind of look at a lot of projects and start to recognize different patterns in how stuff is styled one way or another. It's more of, I'd say, an art form in the sense that there's a bit of an intuition to it that's a little more prominent than other aspects. But there's a link to the full solution up to this point, and hope you got a little bit out of that. Definitely check out the link. There might be some better comments. And onwards, in the next video, we'll start getting more advanced and adding a Twitter button into our project. See you then.